So welcome everybody. My name is JD. I'm the CEO here at Imprimo. So as mentioned, very excited to share with you guys our event about AI. We have tremendous interest in this event. We had the whole week. We have a different posts on Instagram. If you're not following us, Imprimo Art on Instagram, follow us. You'll learn more. We have an AI awareness week, trying to bring all kinds of awareness on things you should know that you might be concerned about, things you should know that might be useful, and how it can help your career as an artist, and just kind of the general concept of how does those different AI tool works, and what do they mean for you and your career. So with that, I'd like to introduce Aidan Stevenson, who's going to be our moderator today. He's working with us at Imprimo. If you haven't met him already, reach out to him. His email is partnership@imprimo.art. We always love to get in contact with you guys and hear some more feedback. So Aidan, we'll invite you to come and to start our discussion with Benedict.
Thanks, JD. And thank you everybody for joining us. A special thanks to Benedict, who joined us in a bit of a hurry today. We've had a time change over the weekend in Canada that the UK didn't experience. So he's a bit earlier than expected, but he's been a great sport about it. And without any further ado, I will let Ben take it away. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your artistic practice, and your background?
Oh, for sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear.
That's grand. Thanks very much, Aidan. And I guess it's possible that we'll be joined in an hour or so, because I know there are some colleagues in England who are interested in attending as well. But it's great to be here and to see so many folk here on this call. My background is very traditional. I went to art school in the UK in the 1990s. I studied in Cheltenham, where I did a foundation. Then I went to Chelsea, which is now part of the University of the Arts London, and later on the Royal College of Art, where I studied sculpture. I studied sculpture at undergraduate and postgraduate level. And I was really into making and developing those embodied skills of looking and expression that I think are core to most, if not all, of the visual arts practices. I probably wasn't that heavily into what you could call conceptual art at the time. I was really motivated by how things are made and the technologies that are used to make them. And I think often when we use the word technologies, we think of that as being something which is new, something which is emergent or strange. But actually, technology is all around us and always is, isn't it? I mean, I'm sitting in a house, right? So the house is an example of a kind of technology, a rather old kind of technology. And equally, textiles weaving is a kind of technology. We only think of technology as being discrete or separate to culture when it's new or challenging. And that is very much the space that we're in at the moment, isn't it, with AI. Anyway, I was always interested in lots of things, I suppose. But as I said, the way in which things are made and an interest in that's always been an explicit part of my practice. So as an art student, as an undergraduate student, I started to make my own lathes for creating plaster sculptures, freestanding plaster sculptures. And actually, you can see one of those pieces dating back to those days on my Imprimo profile. And it was part of an interest also in systems of production and rules. I think as an artist, often I felt that if you can do anything, you do nothing. So I started putting sort of rules and processes around things. I would create an instrument and then test the limits of that instrument, and that became a stimulus for practice. And over the years, that approach, that interest in tools, how they can be developed and what they do, led to an academic interest in a guy you may have heard of called David Pye, who was a professor at the Royal College of Art, not in sculpture though, but in furniture design. And in the 1940s, he created an amazing piece of equipment called a fluting engine. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but they've got quite a lot of his work in the Centre for Wood in Philadelphia, and he's in quite a lot of British and European art collections. And he used this instrument to make objects of craft, particularly bowls. But looking at it from where I was sitting I was doing this research really culminated about 5 years ago. I'd look at this work and think, wow, this is like a kind of prototypical all-in-one computer / milling machine. Because he could set it up and configure it, and even in a way program it to create objects.
That he was able to do this.
This was in the 40s that he created this thing. Yeah, so he would make little paper templates that he could put on the instrument with certain measurements and configure it, and then use that to create, or if you like, to use use a term he wouldn't have used, but print another wooden bowl in that way. So it's entirely analog. There were no digital processes being used at all. But as I was looking at it, I was thinking, well, this is kind of like a computer attached to a milling machine. So that was kind of where my own interest in the development of tools and the way in which things were made progressed as an artist and then as an academic. I suppose also around about 2018, same sort of time as my interest in Pi deepened, I became aware that there was this other thing happening with really emergent technology, which was definitely hardcore digital. Mm-hmm. If you remember, there was the sale of the de Bellamy family portraits at Christie's for over $400,000 US for a painting which is made in ink. It's a really blurry AI generated image. It's actually, it looks kind of rather weedy now when you look at it. But I was kind of fascinated by this ugly object as receiving so much attention and receiving so much cultural and also economic value. That stimulated a kind of curiosity about what these technologies could do. And then again, around about the same time, started hearing about the robot artist Ada, who is an artificial intelligence that can walk. And she creates paintings and other artworks. You might have heard of her. And both of those things, the de Bellamy project, which was set up by a group who I think are called Obvious, and the Ada, I can't remember the name of the creator behind her. They're both rather Duchampian gestures because they're not just about the creation of art, they also challenge the category of art and artist in a really interesting way. So
sure,
that's how I got fascinated in those emergent technologies. That's how I got really interested in them and started looking a little bit harder.
That's interesting. Is the Ada thing? I've not heard of that. Is it a generative work or like a generative process, much like the generators that we see now, or does it create somewhat independently?
It is different. I think it is somewhat independent. It's spelled capital AI, capital D-A. Check it out. I mean, she's addressed parliamentarians in the House of Commons. She can talk. She's got a general intelligence that enables her to hold a conversation, among other things.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and she's been an artist in residence in various places. And that's what I mean about it kind of really serving as a kind of Duchampian gesture, because the artist behind that project has effectively created another artist. So where's the authorship of that work?
That's fascinating. So you've parlayed this fascination with these emerging technologies into actually working with an art tech company. I'm not going to give your title for you. I'll let you say that, but the company's called Viunite. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Viunite.
Viunite. How did you get connected with them? What are you working on, and what are you hoping to achieve with them?
Yes, I'm an academic at Nottingham Trent University, which is a large general university in the East Midlands of the United Kingdom. When I say general university, I mean we cover the whole gamut of disciplines. And what that enables us to do is to tackle projects where there are real intersections between, for instance, things like ethics, computer science, art and design, etc. And there's a government-backed scheme in the UK called the Knowledge Transfer Partnership Scheme, which is sponsored by Innovate UK, which is part of the UK government, where a company who have got a particular problem that they need to solve can work in partnership with academics on a solution to that. And what happens through that process is you get knowledge exchange on both sides of the coin. And that's how I originally got involved in ViewNight, because they were trying to do something very particular, using machine learning to understand traits within images. And a couple of years ago, I got involved in that conversation as someone who knows about art, along with colleagues who've got expertise in biophilic design, ethics, computer science, and psychology. And the team at ViewNight were bringing themselves incredible expertise as computers, both in terms of their computer science skills, which are phenomenal, but also their entrepreneurial mindset in making things happen, sensing an opportunity and making things happen. And universities are fantastic. I've spent my entire life contriving one way or the other to hang out in a university, either as a student or as an academic. But one thing they're not is entrepreneurial. They're bureaucratic. They move really slowly. So whereas a company might think, there's an opportunity here, we must grasp it. I think academics are inclined to think, there's an opportunity here, what are the problems with it and why shouldn't we do it? And I think when you put both of those things together, it can actually end up more than the sum of its parts. But that's how I got involved with ViewNight. But my interest in it was greater than the limits of that particular project. And I think they must have felt that there was more that I could offer to the project as well. So I'm now working with them as a non-executive director. And in particular, what I do is help them to understand art, partly in an art historical sense, but also the day-to-day business of art, and really importantly, what artists value and how this technology can be developed in a way that is sympathetic to the interests of artists and that doesn't damage their revenue, to put it bluntly. ViewNight is a kind of, I don't know if you want me to go into
yeah, definitely. Please tell us a little bit more about what it is that they do.
Yeah, sure.
I think you and I, and you'll see a blog, everybody here, coming out, kind of summarizing a previous conversation Benedict and I had that really spurred a lot of this week, because this is the first instance I've seen, and everybody at Imprimo has been following this quite closely, these developments in AI. This is one of the first technologies that I've seen that seems to be using this in a way that doesn't necessarily have the weight of an image generator. It seems to be a cool and potentially benevolent development. So I'd love it if you got into a little more detail about what it is that they're doing.
Absolutely. And it's worth saying as well that we're interested in working with artists. So if you're on this call and you want to hear more about the project, please drop me a line and I'll be more than happy to pick up a conversation with you. Because I see this as being an opportunity for artists to connect with an audience that they might not already have. So let me tell you what the project is. ViewNight is a marketplace. It's an app which functions as a marketplace. So artists can upload their work to the marketplace, and people who, the general public, who own a Textura canvas, which is a particular kind of digital screen. It looks like a painting, it's framed. It's got a glare-free surface, so it's not like looking at a computer screen or a television or a window. It's actually more like looking at a sheet of paper or or canvas. Can purchase a license to display the image of the artist's work on their canvas at home. So you could think of it in a way as being like Spotify for visual art. Except, of course, in relation to what you're doing, you might have a studio full of physical objects, physical paintings. In this case, you'd be selling an unlimited edition, if you will, that can then be displayed on these screens wherever they happen to be. I was very impressed by the fact that the take from the company is very low. It's very low in relation to what a commercial gallery would take. So they're looking at retaining 10% of the margin on the license. Of course, VAT has to come off as well, but the artist's share of the profit is 90%, which is an incredibly sort of preferential rate. Now that part of the conversation is not really whether really innovative stuff is in this project. There are two pieces of machine learning which have been accomplished. One of them still underway actually through this project. The first of which is that you can upload an image to the ViewNight database, and the curator, the digital curator, which has been trained, can ascertain what style the artwork has been created in, what art historical style it has been created in, and use that to construct a library, effectively, that can be easily accessed and searched by consumers who've got the Textura canvas, which is the name of the digital screen. The other thing which we're working on, which is still ongoing, is some machine learning to understand what we're calling biophilic traits. So biophilic design is a really big thing in architecture and town planning already, and there's a lot of research around it, and really robust research which shows that people who have got access to nature and images of nature are generally better off in terms of their emotional well-being and even their physical well-being. And I'm just going to minimize the chat because it is slightly distracting, but I can see lots of you asking questions, which I'll be more than happy to come to. But I'd like Aidan to cue me in on that, if that's all right, later on.
We'll likely field a lot of these questions.
I lose my thread very easily. I've just done that. So I was saying that
biophilic design.
Thank you. Biophilic design. So there's great research in relation to architecture and interior design to show that buildings which are constructed along biophilic lines are healthier and happier environments. And we've all had the experience, haven't we, of lockdown. Well, actually, I don't know what it was like in Canada, but it was awful in the UK, and it seemed to go on for ages. Some periods of which, was it bad?
Yeah, quite a few. Quite a few months where we couldn't really do anything.
So long periods of which people would spend in the within their houses, effectively confined to their houses, and that was due a period in which our general well-being suffered. So what we're talking about in this project in relation to biophilic design are effectively they're images of nature, but they're not necessarily or only figurative representations of nature. There might be something about the composition or the color of an image which triggers that sense or feeling of connection with nature. And as part of this project, we feel that there's an application potentially in hospitals, care homes, maybe even prisons, where the mood and well-being of people who are effectively, for one reason or another, confined to barracks could be significantly improved through a technology such as this, which would curate content made by human artists to appear on those screens and thereby improve their feeling of mood and well-being. That, I think, is the more innovative and interesting part of the project. It does go a little bit deeper than that as well, and I think some of that conversation is going to be evident in the article which comes out of the interview that the conversation Aidan and I had the other day. But in a nutshell, that's what ViewNight does. It's probably worth also saying here that, so that's an application of an AI technology, which isn't image generation. So when we think about AI in relation to visual art, most people are referring to an image genie. That text box where you say what you want and you get many more than 3 wishes, don't you? You get as many as you want.
The Mid-Journey, DALL-Es, Stable Diffusions, and anyone can fancy themselves a contemporary Rembrandt with a couple of words.
All of that, yeah. There is also an image genie that's been developed by the company that I'm working with, Again, I think that is different from a lot of the competition in relation to the attitude that it takes towards artists' IP. And I'll give you an example of that if you like. So one of the things that's really caused, there are several things that I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about all of those things, but there are several things about this technology which some artists find alarming, isn't there? One of those things is the data, the way in which the models are trained. And the other one is, once the models have been trained, the ease with which an artist's style can be whistled up by using the artist's name in the prompt. So you could say, it wouldn't work with me, I'm not well known enough. So you can't use one of those machines and say, create an image in the style of Benedict Carpenter van Barthold. It's a meaningless prompt. But if you're a really successful artist, someone like David Hockney, then yeah, that can be done. And you can produce images which are really convincingly calling up the style of that artist, or you could think of many other examples, I'm sure. And that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because it would be quite easy to see how that could lead to loss of revenue for an artist, particularly if we're familiar with services like, I mean, I work in a UK context, so I work with DAX. I guess you guys would, a lot of you are probably Canadian, so you might work with Carfac, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess it's the same sort of model whereby someone can, a company can license an image of your work to use on the cover of a book for the sake of argument, and you would receive a fee for that.
Yeah, it's the laws in Canada are quite similar, if not row for row the same to the ones in the UK. Copyright.
Yeah. So it's easy to see how that could potentially lead to some loss of revenue if a publisher thought, well, actually, I want a David Hockney image on the cover of this book of Cavafy poems, perhaps. Because Hockney illustrated some Cavafy poems rather wonderfully, I think. Well, let's make a cheaper edition where we don't have to pay him, and we'll use an AI. I hope no one does that, but
in theory, that could happen, and I think that's where a lot of fear comes from. Yeah. But you are working with this company to try to encourage a sort of due diligence, if I understand correctly.
Precisely so. I was just coming to that. I probably didn't need to spend so long outlining the dangers. We all know what they are. But there are two parts to the problem, aren't there? There's the machine learning that happens, and then there's the fact that an artist's name can be used as a prompt. And an artist's name calls up an extremely diffuse range of qualities and attributes in a really economical manner. So if you say two men in the style of David Hockney, you don't have to describe all of those rather intangible and difficult to express qualities that make something recognizably a work by David Hockney. You just say David Hockney. So one way in which that can be limited is to enable artists to prevent AI genies from using their names as prompts. Because they already, actually, the responsible ones already have quite an extensive list of banned prompts. Because as you can imagine, once this stuff's gone live, if you're a teenager looking to make some mischief or kill a few hours, you're putting in all kinds of nasty terms to see what comes out. And that stuff has to be policed. And in order to maintain their reputations, companies like Midjourney already have a very extensive list of terms which you can't put into Midjourney. You can't use them as prompts. Why not then allow artists to add their names to those lists? The costs for that would be almost nil, because the technology is already there. They've had to build it to prevent people from creating obscene images. And that is one way in which ViewNight is already different. The Viewtopia image genie is already different from other competition, because if you are concerned about that, you can contact Viewtopia and say, I want to lodge my name as a restricted term, which would then prevent someone from being able to use it. Now, if you imagine how difficult it would be to describe the qualities which make, to go back to my example again, a David Hockney, the sort of bar there has suddenly got an awful lot higher. And I think that as a very simple step, there would be very low cost. I'm really encouraged that Utopia have taken that step, but I haven't heard of other companies doing it.
Well, no, I mean, the kind of due diligence you're describing doesn't really seem to exist with a lot of these other companies. They are under the impression, and the law isn't on their side. It's not on their side. It's not on their side. It's been undecided at this moment. I know we're seeing some promising legislation, but for the time being, they don't seem to think, at least, or they put on a public persona of not thinking that what they do infringes on artists' rights, which means we're not at this point yet that we'd all, I'm sure, like to see, where these artists' names are in banned terms. So in your opinion, as it stands now, do you think AI is like a legitimate threat to human artists? Do you think this knee-jerk rejection of the technology and these image generators is valid, or do you think artists can actually use it to serve them?
Well, I'm an optimist, ultimately. And as I've outlined at the beginning, I've always been really interested in how things are made. And so my fascination has totally been captured by this technology. I want to understand as much as I can about it. But AI for sure has changed already the way in which images are made, accessed, sold, accessed, circulated. All of that stuff is already here. And the artists who know most about this technology and who engage most with it are most likely to succeed and profit. I mean, I feel that the worst relationship to be in relation to this technology is a position of ignorance. If you don't know about it, then you are you're really hostage to fortune, aren't you? I think the next worst response is shutting yourself off from it. It feels to me like this is a moment as disruptive or more so than the invention of photography. And I think we'll see the same kind of evolution, not just in art that uses the technology, but also in the whole of our image culture that we've seen with photography. So there's, painting changed, didn't it? Following the invention of photography, painting language changed. And it's not that painters are necessarily using photography, although very many do now. It's that painting changed our image culture. And in the same way, this technology has changed our image culture. If I were a photographer, and my business at the moment was to sell images, for instance, like the kind of practice where a photographer makes their revenue through Shutterstock, for instance, I would be extremely worried, I think, because Shutterstock, to use that example again, already have an AI genie on their website. So when I saw that, that was a real indication to me that this stuff had gone mainstream, completely mainstream. So I've been thinking about that because my context that I bring to this is not just as an artist, but also as an educator. And I work with really young art students. They come to art school when they're 18. And when we're thinking about our curricula, we have to go through any changes we make. We have to go through a validation process. And then the year following that, the students will arrive and then they're taught for 3 years and then they graduate. Well, if I think back to what the art was like 2 years ago, it was different.
Massively.
4 or 5 years in the future, it's going to be hugely different. So I feel I have a responsibility as an educator to teach this technology so that young people can benefit from it and not feel that they are they're wearing the shoes rather than being kicked with them. I think that's really important. I mean, I would say this is an industrial revolution where we need to decide what role we want to play in it. Do we want to be coal, raw material, being thrown into the furnace? Do we want to be some kind of engine driven by somebody else's agency? Or do we see ourselves as being industrialists looking to see where we can add value to the process? And I hope the students are thinking, actually, no, I want to know what's going on and I want to be in charge of this process. Because if they're not, then I think that they're going to be in a position of being a victim of it, not to put it too strongly, that they will lose opportunity as a result. And what I find fascinating about it is that a lot of this technology is really changing some of the core concepts on which our curricula rest and which our understanding of art rests. Ideas of originality are changing. You know, what plagiarism means is changing, because those things aren't just legal concepts, they're also cultural. And isn't it extraordinary that the companies that are creating this technology feel that they can just behave in the way in which they've behaved and get away with it? Most companies don't behave like ViewNight. They don't care, you know.
No, they and I've said this before to a few people, I think in attendance here even, it all feels so ethically intuitive. You shouldn't be able to plug in an artist into an AI generator and have it, you know, replicate that artist's style, even if that work is original. But if I'm a trained human artist and I try to do my best impression of it, David Hockney, it does feel different. How is it different? How do you legislate on that? It's tricky, and it almost illustrates the limits of the law as it relates to like cultural mores surrounding these ethics of plagiarism than anything else.
For sure, yeah, it does. But your question was originally whether artists could benefit from it, and I probably haven't been sort of talking about that enough, because as I said at the beginning of my answer, I am an optimist.
Yeah.
I think part of the answer is not to get too hung up on the image generation aspect of AI, because AI is so much more than that. AI is also about curation. And I've given one example already of how machine learning could be disruptive in a way which is beneficial to artists by disrupting the position of the gatekeeper in the art market, and therefore connecting artists with audiences in a way which is much more democratic and with a much more level playing field. The ViewNight marketplace is one example of that, because the share is very much lower than it would be through going through a commercial gallery. And I think Imprimo is an example of a similar thing, although it's not got an AI aspect to it, but that's another example of digital technology, in that case, being used to democratize the art market. There are, of course, other ways in which artists can use AI. I came across a really lovely project, which is by an artist called Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg. I wrote her name down because I knew I wouldn't remember it. Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, and she worked with the Eden Project, which is a really great place in England, which has got an amazing collection of plants. And rather like Kew Gardens, they're concerned with biodiversity. And her artwork, which is called the Pollinator Pathmaker, uses machine learning to enable anyone who's got a patch that they want to plant. Now I gestured towards my garden there, a patch which they want to plant, to describe the kind of soil and how large it is. And then using machine learning, the machine comes up with a planting system, which uses as many native plants as possible, distributed in a way which would be beneficial to a variety of different pollinators. And then also, if you're interested, creates a set of digital paintings from it, which will show what your garden would look like in different seasons. But it's actually got a very practical application as well, because it will help our gardens be more beneficial towards our native fauna and flora. And although that stuff is possible, you know, by a human expert figuring it out and talking to you on an individual basis, the scalability of it, and therefore the impact of it, would be impossible without machine learning. In the same way as you could improve one person's life by making them a biophilic artwork and hanging it in their house. But if you've got a way of scaling that vastly, you can benefit not just one person's life, but, you know, whole populations of hospital patients or prisoners or whatever community, elderly people, whatever community you want to benefit, general public for that matter. Now that's an example of something. That project by Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg is an example of one way in which that particular artist has benefited from a really intelligent use of machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
And as we learn more about it, I think we'll see more really creative uses of that technology. So can artists benefit from it? I know that they can. I've seen that already.
Yeah.
I think at a more sort of general level, those AI genies are a really powerful tool for me, I think, for ideation. So as you're kicking around ideas.
I know you've used them in your own practice to an
Yeah.
extent. You told me a little bit about that. And I keep bringing it back to the genies. While I agree with you, machine learning is really the tech at the core of it, and artists stand to benefit of it. I think the genies are at the forefront of everyone's mind more so, and maybe shifting that perspective would be beneficial to everybody. But I am curious how you've used that machine learning and that the resultant genie to inform your own artwork.
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm playing with it as much as I can. I haven't yet got to the stage where there's any results I would wish to release, because I haven't quite got the quality there, and I don't want to be another. I don't want to contribute to the sort of heap of slightly banal images that you can see proliferating on social media. But I've played with a number of different platforms. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the one that I've helped to develop. I've played with Midjourney. I've got a local installation of Stable Diffusion as well. And one of the things I've done with it is used my own work, to trained it on my own work to produce images which are like the sort of thing that I might make. And were I still in the business of making work like that, because I'm using historic, stuff that I've made in the past, I would definitely be, there'd always been a kind of slightly ludic, playful aspect to my work. So I would throw ink around to see what forms I should be drawing. I might, use ink blots as a starting point for a sculptural form. And this is another kind of game-like process that I can use to create forms that I can then take from a two-dimensional source into 3 dimensions. But there's another project that I'm working on, because I'm really interested in the way in which these machines have been trained. They're trained on large, mind-bogglingly large data sets that represent a proportion of the internet. So if you've got something like Stable Diffusion, it's been trained, I imagine, on something like 10% of all of the images on the internet. I don't know if that's an accurate figure, but they really are mind-bogglingly vast data sets, well beyond human scale. But what they do is provide a kind of a rather Philip K. Dick-like idea of our collective subconscious that you can call on and interrogate to see how we've created this sort of understanding of celebrity, or an understanding of different types of people. And like a lot of visual artists, for a long time, I've been really interested in Walter Benjamin's writing. And I'm sure anyone that teaches in higher education probably still teaches the work of art in the age of its mechanical reproducibility, right? And so I've been playing with, I wonder what it makes of Walter Benjamin, because I can't help but think, well, what would Walter Benjamin make of it? I mean, he'd have a field day, I'm sure. What would Walter Benjamin make of this technology? And I've also been thinking that in the legislative space, as well as in the litigation space, there's likely to be the most movement once Disney go, ow, this is really hurting us. Can you do something about it, please? I think then something might change, right? So I've also been thinking, I've been playing with these ideas, like Walter Benjamin is somewhere over here, Mickey Mouse is somewhere over here. And I'm thinking about aura, the aura of the images. Because one of my reflections in relation to the images that AI Genies produce is that they are kind of reductive in lots of ways. They feel like they're less than the sum of their parts. And so for me, there's a project to try and create these images and then inject a little bit of human charisma into them as a challenge.
It's interesting.
As a project for myself. And I'd like to sort of take, I think he's a Canadian artist, John Raffman. He's got a big show at Spruce Magazine in London at the moment, and he's been working with AI generated images, which are then physically made, physically painted.
Oh, cool. So he's using
creating
ideas and then interpreting them as an actual human artist.
Well, no, they're being painted by robots.
Oh. So he's using robots to generate the images and then having robots paint the images.
That's my understanding of it, yeah.
That's extremely meta.
but they're physical. Right. And so most AI images that you see are not physical, they're immaterial. And material art, I think feels different.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's got a different kind of presence to it. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but that's what I feel. And so my plan for this project is to take them into drawing rather than printing or digital display, using some of the same technologies that John Raffman is employing in his work. So those are the ways in which I'm playing with it myself.
It's interesting. It's a curious experiment. It's something that I always wonder with this. And I've seen instances. There was one fairly famous one a year ago or so, where somebody actually won an art competition, a fine art competition for their AI art. It was something they generated on Midjourney. They didn't say what it was, and I saw the piece, and it was definitely cool. I would say it was inarguably cool, but there is something lacking. There's some innate emotional resonance that you get out of a physical piece of art, or something that is greater than the sum of its parts. Whereas what you're saying, this AI almost functions as a kind of a dystopic funhouse mirror of society, and it gives you exactly what you put in, and not a bit more. There's nothing. There's nothing transcendent about it. It's solely the sum of its parts. Do you think it could ever achieve the same emotional resonance as a human creation? Or do you think without human hands intervening in the way yours are, or John Raffman?
John Raffman, yeah.
Yeah, or John Raffman is doing it. I think it'll be forever kind of destined as a high-tech curio.
I think, well, that's the challenge, isn't it? And I think the answer is probably yes, but not without something else happening. If you think about a sort of pre-AI digital culture, there's an economy of artworks, which we call the art world. And we tend to think of artists as being the only creators in that economy. So an artist will make a painting or a drawing or a sculpture, and they're contributing creatively to that economy. But actually, meaning is elaborated and developed by other people who have also got a stake in that system, isn't it? By journalists, by curators, by viewers, by collectors. For that reason, the meaning of art carries on shifting. Art has got a latent potential that is elaborated over time through being part of this amazing shared intellectual and cultural effort, which is the art world. That's why we still look at work which was made hundreds of years ago. It's not just that we're in direct conversation through the painting with the Renaissance artist or whoever who may have made it. We're also looking at successive layers of interpretation and reinterpretation. And at the moment, I think that the AI images, that AI economy, is cut off from the sort of elaboration of meaning, which is where actually I think a lot of artwork's aura is accrued through time spent in this amazing system of display and collection and etc. And if AI artworks are then adopted as a tool by human artists and their works are collected in the same way, I see no reason why they can't then acquire a different cultural value and an aura of their own. At the moment, what I see happening is some artists, a small number, engaging with the technology in that way, but there are a lot of people who are calling themselves artists, right? Who are using AI genies to make images and are then minting NFTs. And I find this really telling because when you use an image genie, like for instance, Midjourney are explicit on this point. They don't say that you own the images that are made through their engine. They're released under a CC0 license. They are public realm. They don't own them either for that reason. And as they are public realm, you can't really sell it. So you have to mint an NFT because that then gives you something to sell. But I think it also does something other than that. What I think it does is it creates a relationship between the vendor and the vendee, if you like, the seller of the NFT and the person that buys it. When the person buys it, they become a collector of an artwork. And then through the magic of some kind of inverse operation, because that artwork is being collected, then the person who sold it becomes an artist. So if you like, the minting of the NFT is a kind of mechanism which creates the authorship. Because prior to that, it's just a CC0 image that has actually had very little human intervention.
So if anything, it's almost like these AI art pieces are a banana peel nailed to the wall of Art Basel, until somebody looks at it and says, this is art, and somebody agrees and says, yes, I agree, this is art, I want to transact this. It is no more a piece of art than like a rock you find in the yard.
For sure. And there's there have been artists that have dealt with that. I can't remember the artist's name, but there was a guy who had a piece of work, made a piece of work called Soul of Steinus that was written about by the art newspaper. And he sold his soul as an NFT. There's another art project where you can, where members of the general public are encouraged to sell their signatures as NFTs. And those are artists who are playing with those ideas in a kind of, I think, quite interesting and intelligent and provocative way. But what I've described about that sort of NFT image culture, I think if you look at it, it's really interesting. What role does the NFT play here? And it creates a kind of substitute for aura, which is monetary value. And it also creates a kind of authorship and an ownership, which wouldn't be there without it.
Wow. That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Let's go back to your original question. I'm just going to answer it directly.
Yeah.
Could I see this technology being used in a way which is like interesting and has got creative legs and becomes part of our, shared cultural journey in a positive way? Yes, I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see that happening only if artists engage with it and understand it, and also if we are enabled to profit from it, and it's not a purely extractive technology. It's not, simply, sucking value out of our time without returning any reward. But yes, I can see it contributing.
It seems though, if I'm kind of understanding what you're saying correctly, if without that higher concept behind it, without that idea that the artist is using this AI image that's been generated in service of a more fascinating concept, it's ultimately a pretty mediocre work. it's not going to be it's not going to go anywhere. It's not really going to get any legs without human intervention.
I think that's true.
Yeah. So I do have one more question for you, and you did kind of touch on this at the beginning. But if you can elaborate on it at all, is there anything you believe that artists can do today that can prevent their work from being used in image banks and that they've not authorized them to be used for?
I think that's a really good question. And there are some things I think would help. And they are all pretty much around the sort of steps that you might take to protect your copyright and protect your IP already. So if you are sharing images of your work, which you have to do, don't you? Because if you don't share images of your work, you're not going to sell any work. But if you're sharing images of your work, then make sure that you're sharing them in a way that establishes beyond any reasonable doubt that you are the creator of the artwork. Would be a good starting point. So I think it's good practice to show images of you making the work, you in the context of an exhibition. I would definitely avoid uploading them in large format to sites like Instagram. There's a lot of fraud going on in that space. I would use them on a platform where you have to verify your identity. And you'll have gathered that lots of the things I'm describing here are things which the Imprimo platform does extremely well. You need to be able to make an immutable, permanent record of your authorship in a way that's got an unquestionable authority, so that when eventually you are given recourse, you see something's gone wrong, you see that someone's stolen your work, maybe they've minted an NFT in your name and flogged it on OpenSea or something like that. These things do happen. You can then take action in a way that's likely to reward the effort. I think that's all of that stuff is those are common sense steps that I think we should all be taking. I'd add a few more things to that, actually. I've mentioned already Viewtopia's approach towards allowing artists to register their names as banned prompts. Viewtopia is not a massive player yet, but it's growing. Its community is growing very quickly. If you are concerned, then get in touch with them and do that. I think we could also, couldn't we, contact the companies that are involved for creating other AI genies and request that. And through our membership of artists' organizations like DAX in the UK, like CARFAC, to lobby. They're not the only lobby groups in the UK. We could also provide, because I don't know enough about the Canadian context to know what the equivalent organizations are, but there are certain organizations in the UK like the Contemporary Visual Arts Network that do get listened to by policymakers. And we should be asking for, I think, changes to be made here. I don't think they have to be legislative, though. I would like to see more pressure being put on companies to take action now. Why do they need to be forced to take steps which are actually going to cost them very little? Why couldn't we ask Stable Diffusion and Midjourney to let artists register their names as well? Because that's a very cheap step. It's not asking them to unlearn the learning that those machines have done. It just makes it harder for other people to profit from the learning at your expense as an individual artist. It might be that in time, the legislative space will change to the extent that artists will be able to say to Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, I want you to remove my images from your database for learning. The concern I've got there is whether it's technologically possible to unlearn something in that way.
I mean, is it possible for you and I to unlearn something that we've learned? So I understand these neural networks work very similarly, at least in principle, through the minds.
They do. So it's actually, I mean, in some ways, I fear that stable, that that horse is bolted, hasn't it? Stable doors was left open, the horse is bolted.
Yeah.
Actually, it wasn't left open; it was opened. It's not like we left our work lying around carelessly. And I think you're right, Aidan. I mean, I don't actually know enough about it. So what I'm saying is speculation, but my understanding of the way they work is remarkably like the way a human mind works, and you can't unlearn something.
Yeah.
I suppose those models could be disposed of, but again, whether that's going to be technically possible, given that people have local installations of stable diffusion all over the world, I suspect that it hasn't, which is why earlier on in this conversation, I used the analogy of a genie. The genie is out of the bottle there. It could be that some kind of retrospective royalty payment is made in the same way as there is a relationship between publishers and organizations that look after artists' copyright. In some countries where there's a sort of rather gentlemanly agreement that there might be some stuff that gets missed, and so we're going to pay this ongoing sum of money to you, and you can distribute it among your membership as a way of apologizing for any unintended copyright infractions that we may have made to your community. As these technologies become more profitable, wouldn't it be good to see that happening? That might be a reasonable conversation. If they can't unlearn what they've seen, maybe that would be a reasonable form of recompense.
Well, I've seen enough examples of ChatGPT of it being jailbroken in troubling ways through various verbal prompts to know that they are completely capable of putting these safeguards in place. The guardrails are a part of the programming. And when you have a text generator, and again, this is also purely speculative, neither Benedict nor myself are computer engineers, so I welcome the opportunity to be proven wrong, but it seems part and parcel to the product that you can control it. That is the difference between it and human intellect. So maybe it is a case of artists lobbying en masse, uniting the DAXs and the Carfax of the world, of these groups that advocate for artists' rights, and getting them to put these guardrails in there that don't strike as being that difficult to implement.
No, I think, so I'm going to go back to it again. I think that the steps that Unite have taken, it doesn't cost much, but it says a lot about the culture that they will do that.
Well, and I think one of the big differences with Unite and the other players in the game is that Unite has you. Unite is actually proactively engaging with artists. There is somebody there. There is somebody taking the reins from the community, working for the community, guiding this technology to a place where it is at worst a neutral and at best a great assistance, a great opportunity for visual artists. And
absolutely, well, 100%. I think it's where you have that the artists have got to be part of the conversation, haven't they?
Yeah.
That's so important. It's not in anybody's interest ultimately to squash human creativity.
Hopefully. I hope that's not a utopian look, but look at it. But ideally, no, it's not in anybody's interest to squash it or make it overly efficient to the point that it is at risk. But this will remain to be seen. I really want to thank you for this awesome conversation.